new ideas were springing up. In fact, our ISDN selling high-speed internet quickly became secondary to web development, and web development quickly became secondary to commercialization engines behind it, which quickly became secondary to hosting. So we started a data hosting. The thing just kept going like that. But I learned a lot about tenacity and the frustrations of a startup where, I always say I had hair when I started my startups, and there was a race between it turning gray and falling out, because it is, I think it's one of the most stressful things you can do. It's really hard. And in Kansas City, for a technology business, there's such bias that you had to be in San Francisco or New York. And while we raised money from Silicon Alley in New York, there was a bias against Kansas City-based companies. But on the inverse, when the bubble burst on the coast, it didn't hit Kansas City as hard. We didn't have the fortuitous huge peak, but we also did not have the valley floor valley, if you will.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio & Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Bill Miller. Bill is the CEO of WellSky and a recognized leader in the healthcare industry. His background includes a more than 25-year history of bringing groundbreaking growth strategies and technological innovation to the healthcare marketplace. Under Bill's leadership, WellSky has grown to become one of America's largest and most innovative healthcare technology companies, serving more than 20,000 clients. He oversaw the acquisition of more than 14 companies to the WellSky portfolio. He helped establish the WellSky Foundation, and he helped guide the company into new marketplaces with innovative technology. Prior to joining WellSky in 2017, Bill served as the CEO of OptumInsight, a division of Optum, which is the healthcare services platform of United Health Group. Prior to OptumInsight, Bill served as the Senior Vice President of Technologies at Cerner Corporation, where he had global responsibility for the company's managed services, outsourcing, and technology services business units. You can learn more about Bill at wellsky.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Bill.
Bill, welcome to the Corporate Couch this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, very excited to talk to you. My friend Howie Fleischer introduced us, and WellSky, you're running a well-oiled machine for the last 9 years, being the CEO and chairman. So very excited to talk to you and talk about your career and your successes, not only at WellSky, but throughout your career. So let's start with a fun question, maybe, Bill. People that know you maybe fairly well, what one thing would surprise them about you?
It usually surprises people when they find out I'm a bit of a recluse. Like if left alone, I'll be alone. I do like my downtime, and while I think this job, tends to make you appear gregarious and very people-centric, and I do have some element of that, but my natural state of being is I like my solitude, if you will, probably more than people could ever imagine. So I'm frankly actually a little embarrassed about it. I sometimes will go down to my farm on the weekend and realize I haven't said an audible word for 2 days. But in some ways, when you have one of these jobs, that kind of it is a bit of a recharge, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, you basically hold your own silence retreat. So that's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I love that. Well, and I skew Myers Briggs or whatever assessment type tool. I skew towards extrovert also, but I just heard of a new term. It's an ambivert, where you're okay with being an extrovert, but you do like your time alone. So I may redesignate myself so people can identify me.
I would be right next to you in the dictionary because it is the dichotomy I live in a week is always a little bit surprising. I actually think it works though. I mean, I there's something refreshing about the time down and recharging the batteries for, what inevitably feels like you're on a lot, whether that be with your team, with your the student body of WellSky, let alone analysts, shareholders, speaking engagements and things. So there's plenty of time to be that extrovert and be the spokesperson for WellSky, but it's good. I value the time kind of just thinking about sometimes nothing, but also
Right.
thinking
Oh,
about what this means and what do you do next.
yeah. Well, I can remember countless national sales meetings in my career where, from 8 a.m. till, whatever time I get home from the bars after the dinners, it's nonstop. You're getting questions from everybody about everything. And, after a, 3-4 day national sales meeting, you come home and you just want to, do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's draining.
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Bill, where'd you grow up and what was fun for you growing up?
I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska till I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I grew up in a large family. I had 8 brothers and sisters, just a busy, kinetic household. I was the second youngest. So the family had kind of a natural division. And I think my parents, like most parents, had a ton of energy when they were raising and keeping track of the first 4 kids. And then the last 5 kids, I think we were
Yeah.
maybe a little more feral.
Yeah. You
Kind
could
of
do whatever the hell you wanted to, basically.
well, not really. It was still a strict home, but I think
Yeah.
about the way I raised or you raised your kids today. I mean, we were out till all day riding our bikes and didn't come home for dinner. Now, if you didn't come home for dinner, you didn't eat, but
Right.
just a very different environment. Grew up rather, I'd say comfortable, but certainly poor, but in a family with a lot of support and all the brothers and sisters you could ever hope for in a family and good parents. But we didn't have anything extra. We didn't have money for college and things like that. So, I think it taught you independence in a very, very intimate way, and how if you were going to get, this sounds terrible. It sounds like I walked 12 miles to school in snow and 13 back. But I think I got my first pair of new shoes when I was probably in 7th grade or something. Everything was a hand me down,
Right.
but you didn't really know any better. Then I moved to Lawrence,
Right.
Kansas, and grew up there during my junior high and high school years, and then I ultimately ended up kind of defaulting and going to KU. But big Midwesterner, I have spent some time working in DC and other Colorado and other places, but this is home. The Midwest is home.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're like 12 years old in Lawrence, Kansas, did you have aspirations? I'm going to become a CEO one day, or what were your childhood aspirations?
No, my
Did you have any?
aspirations back then was I was going to play football for the University of Nebraska. So as a Nebraska kid, that was on par
Oh,
with, being CEO of a company, or maybe even better.
sure.
So I had those kind of aspirations probably at that age. I don't know when it dawned on me. I think in high school, I was driven and had a lot of athletic success. And I always kind of thought, even when I got into college, that if I'm successful financially or from a business standpoint, it's because I fell backwards into it. And I always felt like I'd get lucky rather than maybe achieve it naturally. And I didn't get lucky. It ended up being a lot of hard work. And I think that's most people's story. I mean,
Yeah.
to be successful, there you have to have some moments of luck. I even look at some of the national championships that people win, like KU won when I was in college, and the one that they won in 2008. There's always an element of luck with a successful run, but underneath it is a maniacal, I think, desire and a maniacal focus on thinking harder, thinking smarter, and thinking ahead that ultimately that's been what has helped me along the way. But I'd be the first to tell you, though, I'm a function of a great team. If I've had success, it's because I've had probably a good eye for talent and people that are way more talented than me, smarter than me, some of them a lot harder working than me. But I like building. I like building the chemistry of a good team. It's a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah. I've talked to people that work with you and know you. They say, you have a very strong work ethic. Was that molded during your childhood and early teenage years?
Yeah, because I think it was kind of a mixture of things, but certainly when you didn't have much, but you could find ways to get what you wanted. I think I had a paper route at 7 years old, getting up at 4 a.m. I'll never forget that. And that was like being a mailman. The mail kept coming. You had to get up and deliver those papers. Those things would be there. And if you didn't do it, whether you were exhausted after school or on Saturdays and Sundays, those had to be on people's porches by like 7 a.m. And I had a huge paper route, even at 7 and 8 years old. Once again, that's the kind of thing most parents wouldn't allow their kids to do, to go wandering around the neighborhood and throwing newspapers. But that was perfectly acceptable. And it was a means by which, I found a way to, finance my little life as a young kid. And over time back then, and it's so funny to be talking about a paper route now, because I'm not sure anybody does that anymore, but
Right.
I don't think anybody does. But yeah. I remember we would go out on Saturdays and collect. And at a very young age, when you grew up in Omaha, when there was a Nebraska football game on, there would be nobody on the streets. Right. And I learned as a kid, after a Nebraska victory, go out and do collections for the paper route right after the game ended. And you would get these humongous tips. And then if they lost, wait a couple hours till the drinking kicked in, and you'd still get pretty good tips. So, and always wear a Nebraska hat. So
too bad there's no more newspaper little boys and girls delivering.
Yeah, and too bad there's no more good Nebraska football either, fortunately.
Right. Oh God. Oh God. That's funny. So you graduate high school, and what was your thought process on next steps for Bill?
Yeah, I thought I was going to play college football. I had scholarships. I was also a very really accomplished javelin thrower. So I was a quarterback and a javelin thrower. So I had a good arm and had planned to go to college on scholarships. I didn't have any money for college. And then I got injured like the first track meet of my senior year. I had letters of intent waiting at my house. I tore my knee up. And long story short, I had to kind of, all those offers went away when obviously I was injured. I had a chance to go re-earn those scholarships if I went and rehabbed at other schools, but I didn't really have the money to do that. Got very disillusioned, and I went out to Washington State, and I was a lumberjack for a summer. After I rehabbed my knee, I went out there and I was a choker setter, which is one of the most dangerous jobs you can have on planet Earth. Lived in a trailer, and those 3 months, I made a ton of money and had nowhere to spend it. I didn't even have a car. I rode an old broken down horse to work.
Wow.
Every day. Sounds like I grew up in the 20s. This was actually in the 80s.
What was Teddy Roosevelt like, Bill?
Yeah, I'm not that old, but I think I learned a lot. Well, it restored my hunger, because I was like, I can't do this job the rest of my life. I've got to go get a degree. I raced back to Kansas City a week before registration, signed up for 9 hours and jumped into school. I had plenty of money to pay for at least my first 2 semesters, and summarily got terrible grades. I came back and just partied because I didn't really have to work, because I had saved all this money, and it was a disaster. It really was. And I think that year between my freshman year and my sophomore year, I really just shook myself and said, I cannot do this. And so I also learned that I'm very much a product of my environment. So I got in a living situation with some other very serious students, and I immediately went back to being a great student.
Yeah.
Very competitive again about grades. I got a job, worked my way through school and college, and did well. But I was so embittered. I think losing the opportunity to go on a scholarship. I think those 3 months in the woods doing some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life. Once again, really isolated. I was working around 45 and 50-year-old lumberjacks, a really tough
Wow.
crowd. I mean,
Yeah.
and I was high sport being from the Midwest. I got
Oh, yeah.
a lot of really,
A
I
little
would,
hazing.
yeah, yeah. They like to call it jokes, but it was borderline murder. But it was, they liked having fun with what they called me Flatlander. My nickname was Flatlander. So
Would you want to share at least one story of something they did to you?
they used to remind me all the time of all the people who have died having that job, and I don't know the audience of your podcast. I might be careful, but they used to say, "Hey, come over here," and they'd point up in the tree, and there'd be something hanging in the tree, and they'd say, "Well, that was your predecessor. Those are his balls hanging in the tree." Because the choker setting job is a really dangerous job. You put these huge cables around trees. These are gigantic hemlocks, 200 foot tall. And then they drag them through the wood up the mountain to where they're cut up and loaded on trucks. And when they would tighten those cables to pull those trees, anything laying on those cables got shot in the air, including people or equipment or big branches that were as big as trees that would kill people. Other than crab fishing on the Bering Strait, a choker setter is the most dangerous. I looked it up. Is the most dangerous job you can have from a workers' comp perspective.
Right.
A lot of bad injuries, and they seemed to try to walk me into them. They'd also knew that I rode a horse every day to work, and they would go hide my horse and then leave, and then I'd have to find this stupid horse and then find my way home. But they like to take it and hide it like down in a valley or hide it in the back of a vehicle or something, so I couldn't get home. There was a lot of that. They filled my boots once, salamanders. So yeah, there I could go on and on, but they
I'm sure you
like
can.
messing with flat.
And these are the stories you want to actually let people know about, not let alone the ones you don't.
There's other ones too, but
Yeah,
now
sure.
you can get a little feel for why I wanted to go back to college
Yeah.
But I think I was making at the time $18 an hour. I had no
Yeah.
rent. The groceries and food was provided from the lumber company. You started work at 4 a.m, and most times, because as soon as the heat and humidity got to a different level, you couldn't harvest trees any longer for fear of forest fires. So usually we were done by 11. And that's why most of those lumberjacks had plenty of time to mess with me. They all went to the bar. And that's when I started really loving the outdoors. I think I spent those afternoons. I was in the mountains of Washington State, and one of the most beautiful places you could fathom. There's parts of that I look back on that were defining and kind of put me back in a better frame of mind. But great lessons learned of just resilience and stamina. It was a tough job.
So, Bill, this is so interesting, and you're definitely the first choker setter, I believe, job title ever on the Corporate Couch podcast. So, congratulations for that. So, you're 18-ish, and you go how did you just figure out that's what I want to do and go from Lawrence, Kansas to Washington State?
It was someone that was a friend of my dad. This is another also kind of defining moment. Anybody that knows me knows I love cars. I've collected cars over the years. And he was a friend of my dad's. He built a putt-putt in Lawrence, Kansas. His family owned a large butcher shop there. I worked for that family when I was in high school. And he had the distinction of being the first guy to import a Porsche 944, which was kind of their new, after their 911. This was in 1985, 86. And it was being delivered to Seattle. And when he was a kid, he was also a logger. If you remember on Wild Wild World of Sports on Sundays, there were sometimes those logging competitions.
Yeah.
Well, that's the town I worked in. That's where
Okay.
those things started. That's where he worked. We went out and he said, help me drive this car back from Seattle. I was like, great. That sounds great. But when we got out there, we visited some of the places where he had grown up and logged and some of the places that he had lived. When we got there, his old boss said, we have an opening on the crew. Do you know of anybody? And I just said, I don't have to go back home. I'm not going to college. I'll stay here and work. And so I didn't end up driving that car back with at the time, my boss. I stayed out there because I was in a really different frame of mind. I was like not
Yeah.
tethered to Lawrence any longer. I wasn't going to have this scholarship. His name was Bob. My boss's name was Bob. And so he and I drove that Porsche all up and down the Washington coast on Highway 1. And so I got the time in it, and I ended up there just by accident.
Yeah.
It would have not dawned on me to go to Washington State. It's just I was going out there to help drive this car back, and then I was like decided to stay.
I love it.
And it's just weird to think that
Yeah.
I was that impulsive. But I think at that point in time, there was just a lot of freedom. My parents had moved to Costa Rica. All my brothers and sisters had kind of scattered to the wind. If there was any time in my life where I could do something hyper impulsive, that was it, and I did it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, wow, I love it. Looks like you graduated undergrad with economics degree. So 2 questions: why'd you pick economics, and did you go right from undergraduate to get your master's in?
No, I did I think the undergrad degree was, I really like social sciences, and yet I kind of had an instinct that I better creep towards business a little bit. And economics at its core is a social science, but it has elements of trying to really understand macro demand and things like that. And I found that fascinating. It wasn't as math heavy as frankly a business degree was, to be honest.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but I finished that, and then I went and worked on Capitol Hill for a couple of years for Senator Dole, who was at the time, majority leader in the Senate, senator from Kansas, obviously well known. Then I came back to get my master's degree, and that was in city planning, environmental law, kind of a combination of things. But I went to DC. I think, one, I was intrigued by being in the middle of, quote, how this country worked. And DC was a very, very, very different place than it is today. I actually went there with skepticism about politicians, and working for Dole, I came away largely, I think this probably wouldn't happen today, with greater respect, just because his work ethic and his ability to really work collaboratively with the other side of the aisle.
Such a great statesman. Yeah, he was
legendary,
yeah.
and unheard of today in this hyper polarized environment that Capitol Hill finds itself in now. And probably I don't see that changing anytime soon. But then I came back and got my master's degree at the University of Kansas as well.
Yeah. And then, so you graduate with your master's in urban planning and public policy. So, like, what was it? How'd you get your next job after that? What was?
I got a great job, the job that all of my colleagues wanted. I got it. Out of 28 of us, we all applied for it. I got it. It was actually for the city of Lenexa, of all things. That city at the time was annexing property and growing like crazy in that corridor, that 35 corridor, and the K10 corridor was going nuts. So for a planner, it was ground zero, particularly unless you wanted to relocate, which I would have been fine with. But I was excited to stay. I was excited to get that job. It was a great launching point. And I lasted all of maybe 6 or 8 months because, to be honest, I had sort of viewed those jobs as a means by which maybe I re-entered politics. And I did have some slight ambitions to get back to Capitol Hill. Most congressmen and senators are lawyers. I applied for law school. I was going to go to law school. I got that job. And then once again, weird set of coincidence, I got an opportunity to start a business with someone, and I always had a little bit of entrepreneurialism, and I think working Lenexa for the first handful of months, and I loved those people, but they were all quite a bit older than me. They weren't a lot of energy. As you can imagine, These are public servants.
Sure.
It was really kind of 8 to 5 job. It was sort of sustaining a bureaucracy in many ways, if you wanted to be critical, in spite of the fact that city, relative to other cities, was light years ahead in terms of speed. But it was not a great environment maybe for a 23-year-old, or 24-year-old. I forget how old I was at the time. But so when an opportunity came about to start a business, I was all about it. I was a little bit frustrated in the job, a little bit disillusioned with the people I was working around. I think I folded my laptop that day when the opportunity came and said, yep, I'm doing this. I didn't sweat it. I didn't think that much about it. I just, once again, kind of untethered, didn't have a family. I wasn't married. I had some school debt, but not taxing debt. And I'd been relatively frugal. And I was like, let's do it. So we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I mean, I think brains don't fully develop till you're 25, and I would say for males, sometimes that is a little longer, usually, at least in my case. But so, what was it like? I mean, you become a founder, CEO of this company. What did the company do, and what were some of your early leadership lessons of? Oh, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So I had to work with some guys that had about as much experience as I did, two other guys. I was the youngest of the three. A lot of good lessons about how to make that work and collaborate, particularly when we had different views, which became very evident pretty quickly. But the first business essentially was helping US based companies find international distribution points. And we each broke up sectors. I had environmental type of solutions and energy solutions. Someone else had more manufacturing and things like that. And one of the other guys I think had food and agricultural stuff. I was the only one that really had success. I had some of the environmental solutions that really found some footholds in Korea and other parts of the Pacific Rim. I got to travel the world. It was fascinating. Some of the most fun I've ever had in my career is, those month-long trips through 11 cities in the Pac Rim. But it was really dynamic, and really it set the roots of the rest of my career in some ways. One, it teaches you the lesson you're going to eat what you kill. So it was very hand to mouth, as most startups are. Two, that was the advent of the internet. That was the time when the internet became a thing. It transformed our business. We used to stay up all night faxing at 2 a.m. because the fax rates were the lowest then. And when we all got our first CompuServe accounts and our AOL accounts, we suddenly could work all day and it didn't matter. And our expenses went down dramatically and our business went up as a result of it. But then I just became fascinated with the internet and fascinated with what it could do. And the international business began to fall by the wayside. And we decided we would start the first high-speed bandwidth company in Kansas City and sell, at the time, which was called ISDN accounts. I'm dating myself terribly here, but right. Selling high-speed internet accounts to businesses. There was lots of people selling, AOL accounts and CompuServe and things like that, Southwestern Bell at the time. But we were the only one focusing on just selling it to businesses because of what it had done for our business, Unicom. And that business really took off. It was a lot of fun. And so really drinking from the technology hose, those days in the mid-90s, it was a revolution in technology. And we were at ground zero in Kansas City. We were one of the first companies that built a commercial website. And it was actually, for all things, the first Mission Impossible movie. So we were the first one where you could go on a website and buy a Mission Impossible shirt. We did a giveaway, a sweepstakes, where somebody won the rights to go to the kickoff in the opening night in Los Angeles and meet Tom's Cruise. I mean, it's just really cool. You think about that now, that's so second nature. But for some little company with three guys in Kansas City, and we maybe had 10 or 11 people by then, to think that was this little company that in Kansas City doing that was cool. And that happened like in less than, that was less than 2 years, maybe a year and a half.
Wow.
Really crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the wild, wild west days of the internet. I remember I was at Sprint PCS. We were a startup. We hadn't even launched yet. And we were looking at websites. And one of my colleagues, he had worked for American Express in New York City. And they were using supposedly this little small boutique web developing shop in Manhattan, and we actually went to visit, and was like sketchy, kind of a sketchy neighborhood. It was probably in the Soho area. So we were waiting at the door because it looked like a apartment building, and we
Yeah.
waited. And this guy came in, and he showed us into this. Everything was dark, nobody was there. It was like 8:30 in the morning, and we walked in with this guy, who worked there, and he goes, "Oh, just sit in the conference room." And I remember it had all these basically porn movie titles. I mean, like, in the
Yeah.
boxes or whatever, and that's what, because porn was a big early adopter
Right.
of the internet. So I was like, yeah, we're probably not gonna do business
Yeah,
here.
it was so funny at those times because we got opportunities to take on porn accounts, and it was a real ethical dilemma because the
Sure.
value of those in terms
Yeah.
of commercializing was off the roof. We elected not to do it. We didn't want to
Right.
tarnish our brand, and we were very focused still a little bit on bricks and mortar. We had learned that, like the experience you had, a lot of these places didn't have a front door. We spent a lot on real estate. It almost felt like trickery a little bit. We had to stand out as a business internet solution. I think it ultimately was the right thing to do, but there were many times we had to just sit down and go, what are we saying no to? And
Right.
if we say yes to it, what are we saying yes to? And where is the
Yeah.
line going to be drawn? And I think once we just deliberately said we would never do that, it made all of our other decisions after that really crystallize. We really kind of never looked back over our shoulders on that. I'd say we did it the hard way. New ideas were springing up. In fact, our ISDN selling high speed internet quickly became secondary to web development, and web development quickly became secondary to commercialization engines behind it, which quickly became secondary to hosting. So we started a data hosting. I mean, the thing just kept going like that,
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
we ultimately sold it a handful of years later and started another business. This one I started on my own, but I learned a lot about tenacity and the frustrations of a startup where, I always say I had hair when I started my startups, and there was a race between it turning gray and falling out. I think it's one of the most stressful things you can do. It's really hard. And
Yeah.
in Kansas City, for a technology business, there's such bias that you had to be in San Francisco or New York. And while we raised money from Silicon Alley in New York, there was a bias against Kansas City based companies
Right.
over time. But on the inverse, when the bubble burst on the coast, it didn't hit Kansas City as hard. We didn't have the fortuitous huge peak, but we also did not have the valley floor valley.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So was that this whole experience? Was that your first foray into really technology? Because your previous jobs. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
very
because
interesting.
even in college, we were not using computers in high school, but in college, that's when everybody started using their first PCs, and we were gobbling it up. I mean, I
Right.
look at the kids today, my own children, the way they use AI is very reminiscent to sort of the experience that I was having with my first IBM device, let alone my first Apple device.
Right.
Got my first Apple computer in college, and actually my roommate got it, and we got to share it. And then when I got into business, and we were using these old vans and value added networks to do all of our communication and faxing, when we could do all that on the internet, yeah, my life was never the same after that. And
Yeah.
I was probably one of the first people in Kansas City with a cell phone, fascinated by these tools and what we could do with them, and how we could be ahead of everybody else just in the expedience of our communication. And that's really was most of it. And then obviously it's turned into something much much bigger than that.
You founded and led a bunch of these startups, and then you decide to go to one of the most established companies in the early days, called Cerner, now Oracle. What was that like in terms of running around with your peers and being innovative? And not that you weren't innovative at Cerner, but obviously a much bigger company.
Yeah, I mean, Cerner had a good reputation. I had a lot of good friends that worked there. It was the darling of Kansas City. It was growing really fast. The stock was splitting. I was intrigued. And a couple of things had happened in the meantime. I had the third business that I had started had sold. I wasn't going to stay with the company that I had sold it to. I got married. I had my first kid. I had my first mortgage. And I think the idea of jumping into a more established company with these lessons learned, and I had some money for the first time in my life, so I wasn't panicked to go to the next thing. I could be a little more strategic about what I did next. And it was a great step. I mean, I joined Cerner at a really fortuitous time. It was really ascending. And I think my background, and I've never, ever regretted starting my career as a startup person, because whether I work inside of United or Cerner, it was pretty evident that I thought differently than the average. Neil Patterson, the CEO of Cerner, often called people pen raised, meaning they're pen raised in a corporate environment. And that sort of put some fences around their creativity and thinking and ambition. I didn't have any of that pen raised mentality because I was coming from 10 years of just out there on the savannah hunting to survive with a spear and a loincloth. There wasn't a whole lot of support. And so
Great visual, Bill. Great visual of you.
but when you get in an environment with Cerner where you don't have to worry about payroll, you don't have to worry about like the infrastructure, you don't have to do the human capital function, I became, I think, actually better. Because I would argue I'm not good at a lot, but I was always pretty good at seeing opportunities and scaling up to them and capturing them. Never the great operator, certainly not the financial wizard behind a company, but more the player coach kind of approach, if you will, and being part of representing the company, pushing it to where it could go, where it didn't have the confidence it could. And I didn't have a lot to lose. And so that time at Cerner, I learned so much. I learned a lot of things to do that I wish I had known in my startup. And then I also learned a lot of things not to do, from that company. And I think that's been true of every place that I've stopped. But Cerner was really competitive environment. I learned some lessons about how companies got to stay fresh and evolve. And I would argue Cerner didn't do that. And it's ended up in Oracle and sort of not a reflection at all what it used to be, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously you're CEO at WellSky, been CEO, one of the big divisions of United Health Group. And to talk about, we're recording here on April 7th, 2026, March 31st, 30,000 Oracle employees get an email, a termination email. And basically, that is their last day. They need to fill out a form with their personal email address. I mean, talk about, I'll just say the lack of, empathy for 30,000 people. But I'd love your take as a CEO.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
Talk about, I'll just say the lack of, empathy for 30,000 people. But I'd love your take as a CEO.
Yeah. And as an alumni of Cerner, that hurts my head. And unfortunately, Kansas City has a legacy of not sort of maintaining its world headquarters, whether that be Farmland or Sprint. And there's a handful of others. And now you'd have to put Cerner in that capacity. And it's really sucks. I use it. I don't know a better adjective for it. And particularly as alumni of that company, one, you could kind of see it coming, unfortunately, but to see it actually happen is another thing. And it is, frankly, it's a story that gets told way too often. And Oracle has done these type of acquisitions before, gotten thrown a curveball, maybe didn't know exactly what they were buying in some instances. And it's not just Oracle. This has happened to Cisco and other big companies over the years, Intel, every one of them, Google. And particularly those who have made investments, the big caps that have made and hyperscalers that have made investments into healthcare. I don't think there's a real great comprehension of those businesses relative to their consumer bases, because healthcare doesn't have this direct line between consumer and demand filler. And there's this crooked line because some of the payment for healthcare goes through the government and at the very least through private insurance. And it's more complicated. It is more regulatorily tethered. Inevitably, you want to be in healthcare because there's just this last jobs report, 76,000 new jobs, 30,000 of them in healthcare. This is the one industry that just keeps going and going and going, in spite of the other places that have kind of pulled back. But these big caps have a trouble of absorbing companies and maintaining the rhythm and balance and desire that founders or the existing CEOs keep together. I lived through it at Optum and United as well. It happens all the time. I think in the case of Oracle, some of this is very much driven by AI, that they view that if they don't play the AI game, they are going to be behind and it is going to cost them. And so they're sort of burning the ships behind them to go after the promises and the things that AI should deliver a tech-based company like Oracle, and the things that are on the peripheral are going to take a beating. And that's the line of delineation. And as I understand it, I think 650 of those letters came to people here working in Kansas City. And it's just a bummer.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many different facets of this story, but I mean, they just announced 3 weeks earlier they had their best organic growth quarter in 15 years, 17.2 billion, which was a 22% increase, and a net income of like over 6 billion, 95% increase.
And if you're one of those 30,000 people, that is hard to equate. Like, why are we doing this when we're running hot? I can assure you there's things on the horizon there that don't look great, that they're seeing and they've got to react to. And this is when something gets squeezed, something comes out the other side. And in this case, it's a lot of jobs.
Well, and having gone through this, both having to lay people off and being one of those people laid off in my career, it's the survivors. You get survivor's guilt, and now they're all questioning if you're still an Oracle employee. They're like, well, if they laid us off after this kind of quarter, what's in it for me?
There's never been a layoff like this that isn't followed with a bunch of the unexpected consequences. Like, people will leave prospectively because that's viewed as the beginning of an end, or that's viewed as I'm next, or so they have their work cut out for them. I know a lot of people over at Oracle, really talented people, really smart, some of which I've worked with before. Not just in Cerner, but in the mothership Oracle. But I hate to see what has happened to Cerner, honestly, as an alumni and as a fellow in the healthcare IT space. And I think the industry was better having a healthy Cerner. I think it did great work and great technology and great people work there. And so, but these things are secular, and that's why you watch these companies with these really long lifespans, and you really begin to appreciate what it takes to continually evolve and stay innovative and stay on top. And as the more you get into your business, you find yourself protecting what you've done instead of attacking what you're supposed to do next. And I think that's a really good lesson that everybody's got to kind of refresh. And I think it drives a lot of the ways you have to run the company. It drives the kind of people you recruit.
Bill, obviously you've built successful, culture and successes at WellSky, but and you have your own culture and personality. But would any companies that you admire that you try to emulate in terms of building that culture and success model?
So I've spent a lot of time with Google, and the one thing I've always loved about that company is innovation. The way they recruit and empower their engineers is something to duplicate and to appreciate. It's not easy to do. It often feels like that culture, it has a reputation of being kind of a free for all. Everybody gets to do whatever they want. It isn't. It has some great structure to it, and yet it maintains some of the most creative minds. They just love working there, solving problems. And so the more, that's harder to duplicate at our scale, but we're particularly with AI, it's actually become easier, and it's become more necessary. Uh, and so it's been a good chance for us to try to emulate. I love how that company really treats its people, and I would say the way they engineer and innovate at scale. I think they're hard to duplicate. These new AI platforms like OpenAI and Anthropic, I I don't know that it'd be great to duplicate that like historic, like never happened before growth, but I don't think the patterns are set. It's hard to look at those and go have ambitions to be just like Anthropic. But I look at Amazon as another great company just in terms of a relentlessness to understand what makes a consumer happy and understanding how price plays into that, but a whole bunch of other things. And they've stayed as relevant as any company. I don't know if you use that platform much. I use it every day.
Yeah.
And frankly, you don't know much about that culture. It's hard to get behind that. I've gotten
Yeah.
behind it a little bit, but the things that they're contemplating doing in healthcare, I admire, and I actually think they're going to pull it off. They're already starting to, and so that relentlessness of I'm not a well read man, but I like to quote movies sometimes, and I even butcher that. But I always say this Ricky Bobby quote: "If you're not first, you're last."
Right.
Amazon has this ambition of just GE had that culture too of just if
Right.
we're not one, we're two and on our way to one.
Right.
And I appreciate the energy that takes, not just of a one individual. Like, how do you get a team thinking that way, and how do you do that when you have 1.5 million employees? It is remarkable to maintain that sort of culture at scale like that. And while we are become a much bigger company, we pale in comparison in terms of their size. And I United obviously is a company that's fallen on some tough times now. I've always admired, that was 500,000 people there, what it took to keep that company forming like it did for years and years and years. And
Right.
I tend to watch those carefully, and I learn lessons.
So I know you exited Cerner and went to United Health Group, became the CEO of their OptumInsight division. What did you learn there? And obviously Cerner was a big company, but you're working for a division of a Fortune 2, 3, or 4 company.
Yeah, when I got there, I think we were Fortune 29, and by the time I left, we were actually Fortune number 5.
Yeah.
So enormous company. I think that first year was so eye-opening because Cerner was a really great company, but pretty myopic, kind of a not invented here culture, honestly. And so its view of healthcare and the healthcare economy, I would argue, was pretty narrow. When I got to United, I was blown away at the caliber of people, the scale of that business, the acronyms that they talked about, the whole picture of how they viewed how the health economy worked. Not that it was necessarily right, but how the insurers played into this, the federal government. That I got a PhD in healthcare that first 3 to 6 months, and I always felt like the dumbest guy in the room. Just was surrounded by people that just thought different and thought bigger, thought at scale. And I remember being really intimidated by it. Then you started to grab it and harness it. Like, I can be a part of it. I can make a difference. And obviously the last year and a half have been, terrible there, and some tragic events and maybe some self-inflicted wounds, but I have great respect for the people there. But I learned, I think, scale. I think I really learned to think bigger. When you're a startup, you got to focus kind of what's on the windshield. And I always appreciate the people that that could do both. I probably was always a little more focused on the windshield. Cerner bumped that out where I could see past my brights. And I would say United turned the stadium lights on. I mean, you could just a big stage on how healthcare, not just in the US either, also globally, your ability to have an impact and watch that impact. It was exhilarating, like literally getting goosebumps that we did that, we accomplished that. And I get goosebumps when my kids accomplish things, or when they're born, or frankly, when they say things to me. I've gotten a few goosebumps at WellSky and at United by things that we did.
Yeah.
And that's a good feeling. You're in a good job when you have that sort of physical reaction
Yes.
to what you're
100%.
accomplishing. And I can't say that I had that at Cerner, and I don't know that I could say that about the startups, because the startups always still felt as good as they may have gone subscale.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So then you're at, you're doing so well at United Health Group, at OptumInsight. So what was the appeal, to take over WellSky? What was the,
Yeah,
I'm going to do this and here's why.
I think people would expect there's a more logical story about here that's about career management and wanting to be the CEO of your own thing again. There was some of that, but honestly, once again, I think whether I was cutting down trees in Washington State unexpectedly, I found myself in the middle of some tragedies in my family, and I was traveling, something like 200 days a year to maintain the job at United. It was a demanding job, and I was up in Minneapolis all the time. And I think my worst year was 220 days of travel, and an average year was 180. And I did that 10 years. There's a toll that takes on somebody. And between a confluence of some family things, some tragedies, and that just burning out a little bit, I had the good fortune of buying a bunch of companies while I was at Optum, learning and getting acquainted with the private equity companies that sold those companies to us. One of them reached out and said, "Hey, we've heard what's happened in your family. We are going to buy a company in Kansas City. It's 6 miles from your house, and you can do whatever you want with it," basically was their pitch.
Wow.
It was a company that was struggling a little bit. It was owned by private equity. They had big designs for it. And the other thing that just happened, it was in a part of the industry that I had been studying while I was at United, sort of looking ahead and what's going to be the next quote big thing. And that ended up being post-acute. And in some ways that's largely played out. And this was my chance to get in and run that platform with a great private equity firm that was committed to do this with me, and TPG out of California. And it was just great people talking to me at a really interesting time in my life where I was ready to change. I mean, I think by the time I left United, I was running a $9 billion P&L, and I don't know, I had 40, 50,000 people reporting to me. This was going to a company with 400 people, was growing at a negative 4%. It was in a strip mall. People thought I was crazy, out of my mind, to walk off the field at United. It took a while to make the decision, but once I made it, I never looked back. And those first 3 or 4 months were trying and tough. And when people would ask me how things were going at WellSky, I would say, I would send them the emoji with the burning dumpster down the flooded street, because it was a tough environment. There was a lot going on. It needed a leader, and it needed capital infusion. It needed a target. But God, man, we made so much change in that first year. It was, once again, it was one of those times where you got those goosebumps again. But it was good timing, fortuitous timing, between my mind ready for a change. My job had gotten very bureaucratic at United. I was spending more time with Wall Street people than I was with clients. And I don't mind doing that, but I probably am more effective talking and spending time with clients. And once again, I like building things. And in some ways, not that the job was ever done at United, but it had gotten so big, it was frankly a little unwieldy. I don't know necessarily I like smaller things, but I've always said this about the change coming over to WellSky is there's way less zeros behind the WellSky P&L, but the issues are the same thing. It's people, right. It's technology, and it's culture. And so I didn't really care what size the business was. I just really didn't care. So this was not career stair step management. It was, I wanted to get back to Kansas City too. I mean, I just had lost my network here. I worked up in Minneapolis for 10 years. All of our clients were everywhere else but Kansas City. There was only a small operation in United here. The PBM had a big function here, but that was it. I didn't know you. I didn't know really. I'd lost touch with Howie and other people like
Yeah.
that over the years. And since I've gotten back here and been tethered to WellSky, I've just, as I told you, I've spent a lot of time kind of rebuilding home in some ways, and it's been great.
Right.
And
Yeah.
WellSky's been a big part of that process, which has been good for me personally, but obviously professionally too.
Yeah. And I know you did a lot of, it seems, acquisitions at United. You just mentioned that, but was that your strategy at WellSky to, I know you've at least done in your tenure, at least 14 different acquisitions.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah,
intentional?
there was no doubt that when I jumped into WellSky, and it was Mediware at the time, we rebranded it, and TBG came in, that we were going to build a meaningful company, and we were going to be the one company that really spanned all of these different care settings that were outside of your hospital. So that's the easiest way I can explain WellSky is if you're getting if you're getting care in a nursing home, at home, if you're getting home infusion, if you're in a hospice, home-based hospice setting or a facility-based hospice setting, if you're in a behavioral facility, if you're in a rehab facility, there's a pretty good chance WellSky systems are helping manage your health. And so the business was all about, as care migrates a little more out of the hospital, who was going to have the system of record to manage all that care for when Jeff has to get a knee replacement, but he goes back home and he needs some home care and he needs rehabilitation and physical therapy. That's who WellSky was going to be. And we weren't just going to be good at one thing. We were going to be good at all of them because we figured, at least I did, that it would matter because you don't just go to a rehab center and then go back to work. Some people do, but sometimes you have a bad heart issue and then you go to a rehab center and then a home infusion, and then maybe unfortunately you go to hospice, or you get in a car wreck and you have some cognitive issues that require more long-term care. So we're number one in long-term care facilities. So it was an idea if consumers, as we aged as a culture, and payers wanted to move more care out of the very expensive environments of hospital, who was going to build the best system to allow that? And when I looked at the environment, there wasn't a great company. There were a lot of little companies, very fragmented. We ended up buying most of those good companies and pulling them together and integrating and rebranding it. And that has become of WellSky. So it went from this 400 person tiny company in a strip mall to a lot of people working here at the company and worldwide, and 20,000 clients now, probably almost 250,000 of people using our software every day to take care of literally millions of patients all over the country. And I think we're now 3,200 people. So it's just been a combination of those 15 acquisitions, but also a lot of just organic growth too. But it's largely gone as, I think that's one of my greatest satisfaction is the plan we put together 90 days into the job is largely what has happened here. Like eerily on target and where we thought we would be and how we got there. Maybe not perfect line, maybe little squiggly lines, but in terms of the timing of which acquisitions we made when, but we've been on target and largely it's followed a script with a lot of curveballs, not the least of which was COVID.
Right.
Which really, in some ways, in a very sort of, I would never want to go through that again. But on the other hand, it had a benefit to our business because what we do, helping people deliver more care outside of a hospital, became very germane when we didn't have capacity in hospitals during COVID. So put a higher demand on what we did.
Yeah. You and I first met, we talked about this. You were one of the companies that over time, with COVID, we learned we all had to work from home and things like that. Talk about your kind of office policy and how it has evolved since COVID.
It's a little bit of a controversial question. It's becoming less so here over the last year. But first of all, we were really prepared to disperse and work from home, maybe more than other companies. We had already kind of been using Zoom. Every one of our offices in our new campus, every conference room had Zoom in it. So that part of it was really familiar. We had bought licenses for most of our clients because we knew that we wanted more, continual communication and as face-to-face as we. So the video conferencing of it was not a big change for us, not at all. And our infrastructure was set up to support all of our remote employees because even before COVID, 60% of our people were remote anyway. That part was not as difficult. It was the policy of who still had to show up and then when and how we brought people back where it got a little more sticky. And you had people offering, like at the time, Microsoft was telling people, you'll never have to work in an office again. They've all changed those policies. Google,
right?
Same thing. So we were getting poached a little bit. So sometimes we'd lose employees who wanted to go to the promise of never working in an office again. Most of that has proven not to be the case, not completely. But I think in the Midwest, there was a quicker desire to bring people back. We certainly did. This is a collaborative thing that we do, delivering solutions for our client. We have to be collaborative with them. We have to be collaborative with one another. And there's no doubt we lost productivity during COVID in terms of output. Nobody wants to really acknowledge that, but it was true. We could see it every day. So we decided to start bringing people back. We were cautious and careful. We did town halls like every other week as we were debating the when and the how. And we started in Kansas City and we started bringing back people in certain functions. And then we went from 3 days to 4 days full time. And we're back full time now. And you don't hear about it anymore. It's not debated any longer. We still are flexible. If you need to work from home, we allow people to do that. But there was a while where everybody wanted that to stick, that the new norm was never to work in an office again. And my only argument against that was we would have never thought of that 6 months prior to COVID. Why is it fashionable now only on the backside of a pandemic? Give me the logic. And there never really was any. And then if it was a logic about productivity, most of that did not stand up. There were a few people who were clearly more productive at home and better not to have them commute. But what you lose in terms of culture and connectivity is not worth it. That's very much a personal statement, but it's largely been proven to be true. Those were tough decisions to labor over, but we were often consulted by outside companies all over the country about the way that we did it, the way that we communicated, and the way we actually continue to grow. We never laid off a person during COVID. We were adding jobs. A lot of our employees and teammates were living with a spouse that had gotten displaced. We were at least could stand on the fact that you were with a great company that was growing, that needed you. We also needed you to understand that our clients never got to go home. They all had to still go to clients every day. They expect us to be their partner in every conceivable term. And showing up here and bringing them here, this is why we've always had these buildings. We needed a front door. Because what these buildings, I think, say to our clients is we're committed to you, we're here, we're confident about the future. And when we vacated them, it felt like we vacated that. And it's been great to be back. And our performance has swooped back up even stronger.
Yeah. Bill, I love your focus on culture. A lot of CEOs don't think about it, which is beyond my comprehension. But I know you go to like 90% of the new employee onboarding orientation the first day. So talk about that and what you've learned through that and your emphasis on culture. What else you do?
Yeah. So every other week, all the new hires are brought to Kansas City, or the remote ones are sometimes they come to Kansas City, sometimes they're on Zoom. But it's my chance to meet them all. It's usually on Monday mornings at 9:30. I really look forward to it. And it's our chance, or at least my chance, to share my perspectives on the company and where it's going, where it's been, and more importantly, where it's going. And then just engage them in a dialogue. And as you can imagine, we're hiring clinicians, we're hiring engineers, we're hiring support people, we're hiring executives. And all of them come from different environments with a lot of different backgrounds. And so it's really intriguing to hear and just engage them in a conversation why they chose WellSky. 80% of them were referred here by somebody else. That's a great stat. I love that stat. We talk a lot about culture, like what's a good culture? Was your last job a company with good culture or bad culture? Well, if it was bad, well, why? And it's my chance to just say, here's WellSky's culture. You're all getting hired to make it better, by the way, you're change agents. But it usually surprises people that they're I would say 70% of the people that we hire say they had never met the CEO. I find that baffling, like you. I may be busy. That's my job. I don't view that and frankly, if I only listened to the people that directly report to me, as talented and as smart as they are, I would have a very different perspective than what I hear in those hiring meetings, those new hire meetings, or when I do listening sessions across the country where I'll just sit down with 30 WellSky employees, regardless of where they work in the company. I get a chance to kind of hear what it really works, what it feels like to work at WellSky. And I don't get that, like I said, with all due respect to my super team. It's a very different perspective, and it helps them too to go out and talk with people and hear, and also get them to trust you. You can say whatever you want to say. I want to hear it. And I think we've developed a culture where we can be critical and we can talk about the things that we're not good at. I certainly am very comfortable talking about that. And also giving them a little bit of insight of what it takes to run this place. What are the competing priorities the company may have that may not be always visible to a new hire or somebody that's an engineer? I think they appreciate that. But I look forward to those times because it's it also gives me an idea of like, where are we sourcing people? Where are they coming from? What is our hiring practices as good as they need to be? And they've gotten better.
Bill, I know you have a lot more accomplishments at WellSky in the future, and I know this is probably asking, what is your favorite kid of your three, but like name some just proud things that you're really proud in your almost 9 years at WellSky as the CEO.
I'm not one to kind of stop and, reflect on, what a great job we've done. But there are times you got to force yourself, and my team will often do that. The remarkable speed and growth that we've experienced and the results we're generating for our clients, I'm proud of that. I mean, I don't really talk about it that much because I think bragging about your growth, clients really don't care about that. We all know that. And then, because of this relentlessness to stay ahead, I sometimes don't want us reflecting on where we've been. But man, you have to, alone in the dark on those quiet weekends, I do think about what it was like running this place in 2018, and it's very different. And to imagine that we've grown this size, I'm really proud of it. And moreover, it's been pretty scripted. It's not happened by accident. It has been really thought out and executed really, really well. Another thing I'm proud of, and it remains to kind of what the finishing touch on this is our adaptability around AI has been breathtaking. The speed at which we are adapting it and innovating and building new things. I've said this recently. It's fun running a software company again because these tools are allowing us to do things that we used to measure in quarters. We're doing in weeks now. That, once again, that's another one of those goosebump moments. Like, are you kidding me? We can do that now. I'm proud of the team that we've built that has taken that as a personal challenge to be that company, not some lazy incumbent. We don't want to be encyclopedia. We want to stay progressive and not worry about protecting what we built. I kind of went through this a little bit with the internet. Frankly, it was like, I could stay here and protect this way we do things today, or we could be brave and go, we're going to do it a new way. We're going to not leave any stones unturned about how this could help us and change us, even if in the short term, it might be uncomfortable or it may change our workforce. Like some jobs may not be as germane, but there'll be so many new jobs. And we're seeing that already at WellSky. It's fast. We are not a freightliner. We're still pretty nimble. And I love that we've maintained that in our culture. And it's been, once again, it has been deliberate. And when you put the effort in it and to see it work, it's kind of like raising kids and you teach them manners and you never know it's going to stick. But then you watch them in their 20s, like, that might have stuck. These are great very good kids. And I'm very proud of that. And that's the other thing. I mean, I'm very proud of my children. Very, very proud. They are wonderful, fascinating, diverse group of kids. You can't get me to say which one's my favorite because I couldn't do it, but they're also very different too.
Yeah, definitely my experience also. So if you look at WellSky a year from now, 2 years from now, what's giving you goosebumps?
Honestly, I think this AI thing is probably going to create a bit of a shakeout. And I think we have an opportunity to kind of leap ahead if we play our cards right and work hard. And so there are so many interesting things starting to grow. I think similar to Amazon, we've built a very diverse business with a lot of unique avenues to grow. Some of them in life sciences, some of them working with payers, some of them working in places where we've traditionally not invested as much, like revenue cycle. We've got a pretty good revenue cycle, but now we're seeing huge opportunities, and our size and scale is starting to pay some dividends. Our relationships have grown in terms of the way clients trust us. I think we're starting to be viewed as more the kind of the standard, and don't do anything until you see what WellSky is doing. That's a good position to be in. It gives me goosebumps about if we can harness AI as we're doing, man, things start looking pretty interesting in a couple years about what this company will continue to evolve to. And the other thing is, to be flat honest, it's changed I don't think we're going to buy 14 companies like we've done the last. I think it'll probably slow that down a little bit. There'll be an appetite. There always is an appetite for acquisitions, but we're finding we can build so many things so fast on our own that otherwise we might have acquired in the past. And so it's changed the dynamic of what we do with our capital. Now, if that capital is freed up to do other things, how could we self-fund and go faster? I'm excited about what that looks like over the next 5 years.
Bill, there's two groups of people I love helping. One's at recent college, or even now today, high school graduates going to go on to their professional career. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I tell my kids this, and I would never say I'm not doing what I love. I think these jobs are hard and the stress of them is self-evident. I know that when I'm doing things that I love, I don't count the time. It seems not like a job. And I want that for my kids. And frankly, anybody that is seeking work, and I know the job market for young people is changing and getting tougher, but do your best to do what you love, because then it doesn't feel like work and you end up being great at it and you won't even know that it's happening. That's the way it will be. And there's a certain amount of this job it has more responsibility associated with it, to shareholders, to the team, all the teammates that work here. That's a huge motivator. I do like succeeding, and I do love when we have to solve the hard problems at WellSky. So that's where I am tethered to the love of what I do. I don't always love, board meetings, and I don't always love some of the things that you have to do in these jobs. But if any young person can stay as close to what makes them happy, I think they'll live longer and they'll probably do better financially as a result.
The other group is, if you remember that first time you were had a job that you were in charge of a group of people, you went from an individual contributor to being their manager. What advice would you give to that first time manager?
Find a mentor. I mean, I did that early. I read books and stuff to try to close some of that gaps, and that was okay. But I met a guy at Cerner that ended up kind of being a mentor to me, and to this day he still is, Dick Flanagan. And and there's others, people from United. But I think the best thing you can do, and what I've found, is that people are always willing to do that. That you got to take what advice you get from me, or frankly any mentor, with some element of salt, if you will. But I do think people that have been in the seat, that really understand and have had some experiencing managing humans. And in the AI world, it's even more important, because some jobs will change, and managing people is going to change, but nothing can replace the empathy and how you make people feel, kind of the golden rule thing, and how you're viewed. Do you have courage, or do you shirk away? And I think understanding communication, like I am a reluctant communicator, and I've learned largely through lessons from my mentors. If you leave people in a vacuum from a communication standpoint, they're going to make bad assumptions. They're not going to make good ones. And so that's an adage I live by. And the recluse in me doesn't always want to get on a pedestal or write that email that states exactly what I'm thinking and what we're going to do next. But I do think that's a learned, and the pace of that, and to where you need to intercede in picking your spots in managing a team, whether it's a young team or an old team. Those are things a mentor can really help you think through. And It does take experience. If you do it via a textbook, you'll have textbook results. If you do it through, I think, more intuition and a good mentor, you can have outlandish results.
Yeah.
So,
Bill, thank you so much for coming on the Corporate Couch. I'm honored. It was such a fun conversation, and you've done such great things in your career, and I know you're continuing to grow WellSky and make it even more successful. So thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Jeff. It was really I'm really flattered that you asked me to do it. So thank you.
I was so honored to have Bill Miller on. You got to love Bill. Bill goes from riding a horse to a logging job somewhere in Washington State at 19, where your coworkers hide the horse so they can't get to it.
They hid his horse.
Yeah. He builds one of the first websites on the internet, then runs a $9 billion business at United Healthcare in something you should love, in analytics and data.
Yeah.
And then he turns around a company as the CEO that when he got there, he described it as a burning dumpster. Like, this is not a career path. It's more like we should make Bill Miller into a movie, like the story of Bill Miller. But there's so many things I like. He's just a great storyteller, even though, like he said, well, I got, and you can relate to this. He didn't talk for 2 days. He was fixing up his property out in somewhere in southern, south of Kansas City and South Kansas. And he didn't talk for 2 days. And, and he runs a 3,200 plus person company in WellSky.
Now I can easily go 3 days without talking to anybody, but I don't run a 3,000 person company.
Yeah, the worst part about your life, Joe, is you probably talk to me the most out of anyone.
Yeah, that is a true statement. You look at my inbox, 2/3 of my emails are from you. You look on my phone, 2/3 of my phone calls and my messages are from you. It's disgusting.
Well, it's disgusting.
But it's the cards that I have drawn. It's the deck I've been dealt. It's the life I have chosen.
But I mean, again, there's so many good things about Bill, but I love that he goes to 90% of the new employee orientation meetings and talks to them.
Isn't that great?
I mean, he gets comments all the time. I was at my other company 8 years. I never met the CEO, and people are surprised about it, but I'm like, that's how it should be. They're working for you, right? And it's not like they're every 2 weeks. So they're such a high growth company. They have new employee, so he's, dedicated. If he's making 90%, it's every Monday, every other Monday morning he appears. So I thought that's just fantastic. It shows his approach to culture. But I mean, he had so many good stuff. I mean, like the paper route, waking up at 7 years old at 4 a.m., in Nebraska, he would go, if the Cornhuskers football team won, he'd go immediately to collect on Saturday afternoons. And then if they lost, he would wait several hours after the game because they'd be drinking to drown their sorrows.
Until they're too drunk to calculate it.
Yeah, both ways got him a lot of tips.
Yep.
And then I learned what a choker setter is in the lumberjack industry. I guess one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. But how he got hazed by his older colleagues, hiding the horse, filling his boots with salamanders, rode his horse to work. He's being told his predecessors that have died on the job or that type of thing. Yeah, they built one of his companies. He started early on, built one of the first websites, for the first Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
That's not bad.
That's kind of a trendsetter.
Yeah.
And then, he's real straightforward with his, failure in, college. He had all the money from logging. He was making buku bucks, and he came back and partied at KU. And then he said, I need to get my act together. I'm a product of my environment. So he changes his environment, becomes a top student. And then he's running a $9 billion division at United Healthcare. And then he decides to take the CEO job at WellSky, and I don't think it was named WellSky at the time. And he goes, "Yeah, we were actually about 400 people, and he goes, he was telling people it was like a burning dumpster floating down a flooded street, and they were in a strip mall." And now he has these two beautiful buildings in a suburb of Kansas City, Overland Park, and I could have talked to Bill, and it was probably our longest episodes in a long time. I could have talked to him another hour. But what was your take on it, Joe?
It was just amazing. Everything that you've mentioned is a story, can be expanded into a story about Bill, and I think that was wonderful. He's what I would call a kind of a Midas touch entrepreneur, because he would start a company or run a company and then sell it, and then run another company and sell it, and just on and on and on, to where at the end, not the end, but where he is currently in his career, he can pretty much write his own ticket, where he was working for United Healthcare for, 10, 15 years or something, and then, I think I'll go work for this.
Yeah, the dumpster fire company.
Yeah. He did mention, and I think this was pretty early in the interview, he talked about luck and entrepreneurs with luck, and he said, I'm not going to deny the fact that there's a certain amount of luck in this, that you find yourself falling into certain situations, and that's lucky, but I can tell you that it's never entirely luck. You can never look at somebody who is successful or wealthy or whatever and say, well, he was just lucky. Because although luck may have had a certain amount of influence into his career or into his story, that could not be all of it. So for everybody like that, I can name 10, 20 people that were born with a silver spoon but lost it all within a generation. And I can also point to dozens of people that were born with absolutely nothing and built a successful career out of it. And that is not all luck. It's a lot more than that. He's worked very hard, and he deserves every penny of everything that he's ever gotten in his career. It's a wonderful story. I really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, so good, so good. Joe, like many of our outro recordings, we're recording here on a Friday. Didn't sleep well last night because of the storms coming through Kansas City. I need a joke, so give me a joke today.
You got a joke? What kind of joke you're looking for?
I love bars. How about someone walks into a bar?
Somebody walked into a bar. Okay, here's a joke about somebody walking into a bar. A grasshopper walks into the bar, and the bartender says, "Hey, we've got a drink named after you." And the grasshopper says, "You've got a drink named Steve?"
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.